and welcome to Chapel Chat. I'm Pastor Kevin Little, and this is the chapel at Ranch Wolf First United Methodist Church. This past Sunday, Pastor Emily gave a message talking about persistence and how society tends to regard persistence as an irritant rather than a good thing. But Jesus encouraged persistence in the parable that she used as an example. Pastor Emily encouraged us not only to be persistent in our own requests, but to grant requests as we are able, rather than tuning them out or turning them away or turning away from the person who's requesting it. We need to recognize that these requests are cries for help, and as Christians, then we rise to meet them. And as she spoke, it brought to mind some issues that have been persistent here in our country. The first of which was the persistent request from Ukraine for air support. That country is asking for help to keep Russian bombers out of their airspace, which would protect their citizens. So far, the United States and other NATO countries have declined that request, which is contributing to a loss of life in the Ukraine. But there would be consequences to increased involvement that have to be considered also. As Christians, though, where are our priorities in this? What should we be doing or praying for? Beyond that, we have other consistent issues that are discussed here in the U.S. People are persistently in need of housing or support in securing housing. What keeps us as Christians from making significant changes to our housing system that might help us eliminate homelessness in our country? What about increased wages? We've seen a ton of activity about this over the past couple of years, and finally, after years of trying to get minimum wages raised, people are starting to get things going. And people still argue against paying people more, though. But many times that argument is based on whether we feel like that job is worth it. But we often don't stop to consider whether or not the rate of pay that is offered is actually something that people can live at, or whether or not our expectation is even really justified. Just think about how many adults have had to take jobs in the fast food industry since the economy tanked in 2008. All of a sudden, people were desperate for work and took whatever they could get. That took a job that was considered entry level away from the young people that might normally work it. Rather than being something that kids worked at while living at home, this job then needed to be able to support a family. And why is it even okay to consider certain types of work as less important than others? Why should a janitor make significantly lower amount than other people? Is that job somehow less important? In 2020, there was a lot of discussion about essential workers and how they were needed to keep our economy moving, and they had to just accept a greater risk of being infected with COVID to do so. The reality was that to keep everything going, certain people were expected to sacrifice themselves for the rest of us. But we still didn't want to consider their job as being worth an increase in wages. Why is health care such a ridiculous political discussion? Once again, there were persistent requests for affordable health care that was fought against for years, and even still is. Progress was finally made, but it's still incredibly expensive. If there are other countries that do things differently, and we often refuse to make similar changes because that's not how we've always done it, and because we might have to make some major adjustments to how we allow some companies to operate. As Christians, what are we called to do here when people can't afford what is considered to be a necessity for life in our country? And what about gun control? We see persistent conversations about trying to control the absolutely ridiculous number of guns in our country, and yet little to no progress is made. Gun control is absolutely a necessary conversation and something that needs addressed. I own a gun. I firmly believe in my right to do so, but do I need to own an assault rifle? No, absolutely not. Could it be fun to shoot? Sure, but it's not a necessity. Do I need to own a rocket launcher or a grenade launcher? Absolutely not. Would they be fun to shoot? Sure, but nobody wants me to have regular access to something like that. And yet people argue about such a ridiculous idea and nothing changes. And kids are killed in schools or people are shot in the street, even here, because we don't want to actually make sensible changes that protect the right to own a weapon and protect someone's life at the same time. What about racism? This country has been struggling with racism since it was created on the backs of the slaves that we kidnapped and forced to work to build it. And yet here we are, protecting free speech of people who refuse to even recognize the humanity of another group, or who discriminate against them, or even worse. It's 2022, and the statement that Black Lives Matter is still necessary. Not because other lives don't matter, but because we collectively need to be reminded that Black lives matter just as much as all of the others. Persistence has gotten us to where we are now, and persistence is necessary to keep us moving forward. I guess what I'm saying is that all of these issues are persistent right now, but what would change if we decided to persistently act as if we were Christians and to treat our neighbors as we ourselves would want to be treated? Would we set up a no-fly zone over our neighbors in Ukraine to protect them better than they can protect themselves? As Christians treating our neighbors who need housing like we want to be treated, would we work harder to make sure that everyone has a place to live? As Christians, treating our neighbors who work jobs that are every bit as important as ours are and are considered to be essential workers by our economy, when we're treating them the way we want to be treated, are we making sure that they are able to earn a wage that gives them a fair chance at survival? As Christians, treating our neighbors who need access to health care the way that we ourselves would want to be treated, are we making sure that they have affordable access to the services that all of us need? As Christians who are treating our neighbors as we would want to be treated, are we making sure that there are sensible gun laws in place that protect the lives of the people around us while also allowing for us to own a firearm? And as Christians who are loving our neighbors and looking out for their interests just as we would want them to look out for ours, are we fighting against racism in our country, or are we just turning a blind eye to an issue that may or may not actually involve us directly? We need to be persistently living in the way that Jesus has demonstrated, and that means listening to persistent requests with understanding and appreciation for their need, just like God does. This is how we can start bringing the kingdom of God into the community that's around us. Thanks for joining me for another Chapel Chat. I'll see you here again next time. Have a great week.